How do you convince a nation of 1.4 billion tea drinkers to fall in love with coffee? China had been perfecting tea culture for over 4,000 years. For most Chinese, coffee used to be some bitter herbal medicine tasting drink. But somehow, one American coffee company figured it out. And for nearly 2 decades, Starbucks absolutely dominated the Chinese market until something shifted. Starbucks is reportedly preparing to sell off its Chinese operations for $5 billion, essentially admitting defeat in what was once their greatest success story. So what happened? How did a brand that seemed unstoppable suddenly find itself desperately looking for an exit from the world's second largest coffee market? It's a story that every global brand entering China needs to understand, because in today's China, yesterday's rules no longer apply. This is the rise and fall of Starbucks in China. And it all started with a simple question. What does coffee mean to modern Chinese society? In January 1999, something unprecedented happened in Beijing. A new store opened on the ground floor of the Chinese World Trade Center, and it wasn't selling tea. For the first time in over 4,000 years of Chinese civilization, someone was betting that this ancient tea-drinking culture could learn to love coffee. Most people thought it was impossible. Howard Schultz, Starbucks CEO at the time, later admitted that when he proposed expanding to China, everyone around him said he was crazy and that this was a terrible idea. It's a tea-drinking culture. Most people in China don't even drink coffee. But Starbucks wasn't just selling coffee. They were selling something much more powerful, a vision of modern life. To understand why Starbucks succeeded, you have to first understand what China was becoming in 1999. The country was experiencing the most dramatic economic transformation in human history. Deng Xiaoping's economic reforms had been unleashing market forces for 2 decades. By the late 1990s, China was preparing to join the World Trade Organization. Foreign investment was pouring in, and something entirely new was emerging, a middle class. For the first time since 1949, millions of Chinese families had disposable income beyond basic necessities. Urban households that once aspired to own a bicycle, wristwatch, and sewing machine, the big threes of the 1970s, were now dreaming of refrigerators, washing machines, and color TVs. But this new middle class wanted more than just appliances. They wanted identity. They wanted to signal that they had arrived in modern China. And they were looking to Western brands to show them how. Before Starbucks opened the first Beijing store, Starbucks conducted extensive market research that revealed something surprising. Their research teams didn't just rely on surveys and focus groups. They conducted ethnographic research, sending teams to spend time in Chinese cities to understand local culture, social interactions, and consumer behavior patterns in real-life contexts. This hands-on approach helped them understand not just what Chinese consumers said they wanted, but how they actually behaved. Their research revealed that Chinese consumers were more interested in the social experience rather than just coffee itself. They wanted a space for social gatherings, not just a quick caffeine fix. Howard Schultz made it his personal mission to visit China regularly. In 2016, he announced plans to open 500 new stores annually for 5 years. His hands-on approach meant that senior Starbucks executives regularly traveled to China to ensure that the local teams had the benefit of all the things that they had learned, as well as the benefits of the mistakes that they had made. Think about that for a second. The CEO of Starbucks himself made it a point to visit China regularly to understand local customs, build relationships, and learn how people actually think and talk. So if you're someone who's remotely interested in doing business in China, or just visiting, you should probably do what Howard Schultz did in spirit, learn the language. And that's where our sponsor, Preply, comes in. Look, Mandarin can feel pretty intimidating at first, but Preply makes it personal. You can choose from over 5,500 online Chinese tutors who can tailor lessons to your exact goals. Whether that's mastering business Mandarin for meetings, handling daily conversations, or just making your everyday life smoother in China. What I love about Preply is how practical it is. I'm not big on memorizing random textbook phrases, and I also don't have a lot of time because I need to make content for you guys. So I need to be able to practice live with a real tutor who can correct me on the spot, teaches me natural expressions locals actually use, and helps me build confidence to speak.
Here is the good news. Thanks to an exclusive deal we worked out with Preply, you can now get 50% off your first lesson. Just use the link and discount code in the description and start investing in your future today. Because it is an investment. The truth is, the more Mandarin you speak, the more doors open for you in China. All right, let's get back to the story.
And based on their research, Starbucks chose a gradual, partnership-based approach rather than going at it alone. They started with Beijing-made a coffee company as a wholesale distributor, and then upgraded to licensing agreements, and eventually formed joint ventures with local partners who understood government relations, consumer behavior, and regional differences. So this wasn't just business strategy, it was cultural intelligence. As Schultz put it, we want our customers to recognize that we're not coming to China to make money. We're coming to China to build an enduring company that they can trust and that can view as one of their own. The research paid off spectacularly. Starbucks introduced China to the concept of the third place, a social space that exists between home and work. In a rapidly urbanizing China where traditional social structures were breaking down, Starbucks offered something revolutionary: cultural spaces designed to feel both international and welcoming. Unlike their smaller American formats, Starbucks China stores were spacious, averaging 185 square meters or about 1991 square feet. They featured comfortable seating areas, free Wi-Fi, and an atmosphere that encouraged people to stay, study, socialize, and conduct business. For young Chinese professionals, especially those studying or working long hours, Starbucks became their living room, their office, and their status symbol all rolled into one. But here's the genius of Starbucks' positioning. They made coffee expensive on purpose. A Starbucks latte costs around 30 RMB, which is about $4.20, when a bottle of water costs around 3 to 5 RMB, about 40 to 60 cents. Being seen with a Starbucks cup became a symbol of social status for the rising middle class. Research showed that 71% of Chinese college students felt their social status improved when visiting Starbucks, viewing it as a modern continental entity. Despite positioning themselves as premium and Western, Starbucks was smart enough to adapt to local taste as well, at least initially. They created China-specific menu items that blended Western coffee culture with familiar flavors like green tea frappuccino, black sesame matcha latte, and red bean frappuccino. During Chinese festivals, Starbucks went even further. They offered mooncakes during Mid-Autumn Festival with flavors like red bean and lotus seed paste. Their stores reflected Chinese aesthetics too, incorporating calligraphy art, bamboo furniture, and local artwork to create an atmosphere that both felt international and respectfully Chinese. By December 2017, Starbucks was ready to make the ultimate statement in China. They opened what would become their crown jewel, the Shanghai Reserve Roastery. Located at 789 West Nanjing Road in the heart of Shanghai's most prestigious shopping district, it was designed to be the world's largest Starbucks. Fun fact, we actually conduct a lot of our Asian Boss Street interviews in Shanghai in front of this building. The store features 3 massive coffee bars, including the one that stretches 88 feet long, the longest coffee bar in any Starbucks worldwide. Over 400 employees could serve 550 customers simultaneously. During the grand opening, Howard Schultz even sat down with Jack Ma, founder of Alibaba and China's most successful entrepreneur, for a joint interview. The partnership seemed perfect, Starbucks providing the premium coffee experience, Alibaba providing the digital innovation. This was Starbucks at its absolute peak in China. They had over 3,000 stores across 136 cities. Shanghai alone had more than 600 locations, more than any other city on Earth. They were opening one new store every 15 hours. They commanded 42% market share. China had become their second largest market globally. What Starbucks achieved in China between 1999 and 2017 was nothing short of cultural transformation. They didn't just introduce coffee to a tea-drinking culture. They redefined what modern Chinese urban life looked like. Coffee consumption in China grew 7.5 times faster than the global average. Shopping malls gave Starbucks free rent just to boost their own image and attract affluent customers. The green siren logo became as recognizable in Beijing and Shanghai as it was in Seattle. But success, as we'll see, can be fragile in a market that never stops evolving. Because while Starbucks was celebrating their dominance, something was stirring in China's coffee landscape. Local competitors were watching. learning, and preparing to challenge everything Starbucks had built. The question wasn't whether China would continue to love coffee. The question was whether they would continue to need Starbucks to get it. It was January 2018, just months after Howard Schultz and Jack Ma celebrated their partnership in that gleaming Shanghai palace, when something quietly opened in Beijing that would change everything. A small coffee shop with a sign reading Luckin Coffee appeared at the base of an office building. No cozy seating areas, no ambient lighting, no carefully curated third place atmosphere. Just a counter, two baristas, and a QR code on the wall. Jenny Qian, the co-founder of Luckin, wasn't even a coffee person. She was a tech person. As a former executive at UCar, China's answer to Uber, she had seen how ride-hailing apps could completely disrupt traditional industries. Now she was staring at China's coffee market and seeing the same opportunity. The math was simple. Starbucks was charging 30 RMB, or about $4.20, for a latte that costs around 8 RMB, or $1 to make. But what if you could offer the same quality coffee for 15 RMB, or $2, and still make money? Luckin's mission was to allow more Chinese consumers to taste high-quality coffee at prices that didn't require them to skip lunch. Here is what made Luckin radical. You couldn't buy coffee there with cash. You couldn't even order at the counter. Everything, and I mean everything, had to be done through their mobile app. But you see, this wasn't just about technology. This was about data. Every order gave Luckin insights into customer preferences, peak hours, inventory needs, and buying patterns. They could optimize supply chains and predict demand, and even personalize promotions in ways that traditional coffee shops never could. The app also allowed them to do something Starbucks couldn't: offer dynamic pricing. Discounts that changed daily based on demand and customer behavior. The typical experience at Luckin looked like this. Open app, see today's promotions, order coffee, often 50% off regular price, pay digitally, get notification when ready, which usually only takes 3 to 5 minutes, and then you just pick it up from the counter. No waiting in line. For young Chinese consumers accustomed to mobile payments and instant gratification, this felt like the future. Going to Starbucks suddenly felt like using an old flip phone. Luckin's business model was fundamentally different from Starbucks. Instead of large, expensive third-place locations, they opened small pickup counter near office buildings and universities. Instead of 15 to 20 employees per store, they needed just 1 or 2 baristas. This allowed them to offer coffee at 25 to 50% less than Starbucks while maintaining healthy margins. But you see, they weren't trying to be cheaper forever. They were using low prices to build massive scale quickly. Once they had millions of customers and thousands of locations, they could leverage economies of scale that even Starbucks couldn't match. This was the moment Starbucks should have been terrified. Luckin wasn't just offering cheaper coffee. They were offering better coffee for Chinese taste preferences. After analyzing big data from online orders, they discovered that Chinese consumers overwhelmingly preferred milk-based coffee over traditional black coffee. So Luckin doubled down on lattes, but not just ordinary lattes. They created fusion beverages that bridged the gap between coffee and the milk tea culture that Chinese consumers already loved. The breakthrough came in 2021 with the raw coconut latte. Instead of regular dairy milk, Luckin used coconut milk, which had 3 times the fat content, creating a creamier, richer texture that looked more appealing in the cup. The drink became an instant sensation, selling over 100 million cups in its first year. It wasn't just popular, it redefined what coffee could be in China. This wasn't Western coffee adapted for China. This was Chinese coffee innovation. Luckin followed up with more localized hits. The brown sugar boba latte, combining coffee with bubble tea elements. The cheese latte, inspired by cheese foam commonly added to Chinese tea drinks. And even collaborations like the Mao Tai latte featuring China's national liquor. So all of these factors led to something unprecedented in retail history. From January 2018 to March 2019, Luckin opened an average of 5.2 stores per day. By the end of 2018, they had over 2,000 stores. By 2019, they had more locations than Starbucks in China. It was the fastest retail expansion in Chinese history. But Luckin's real achievement wasn't speed. It was changing how Chinese consumers thought about coffee. Before Luckin, coffee was almost aspirational. You bought Starbucks to signal status, to feel more Western, to show that you had made it. Coffee was an occasion. Luckin made coffee utilitarian for their young white-collar workers' target demographic. It was fuel for work, a quick pick-me-up between meetings, something you grabbed because you needed caffeine, not because you needed to feel sophisticated. By late 2019, the writing was on the wall. Luckin had more stores than Starbucks in China. Their app had millions of active users. Young consumers were saying things like, why would I pay $5 for Starbucks when I could just get the same coffee from Luckin for $2, especially when it tastes better?
像我们普通的上班族，肯定是公司楼下虽然既有星巴克也有瑞幸，但是很多人90%的员工可能都会选择去喝瑞幸，因为它的价格肯定是10块钱就能喝到一杯咖啡，而星巴克的价格呢就是瑞幸的3倍。
Luckin had basically proven that Starbucks' premium pricing wasn't based on superior coffee. It was based on perception. And once that perception cracked, everything became vulnerable. And for Starbucks, sitting in their thousands of expensive stores with their expensive lattes, this created an impossible choice that no business strategy could easily solve. But they had to try something. When Luckin's rise became undeniable by early 2019, Starbucks faced what business schools would later call the impossible strategic choice. Every option on the table would force them to sacrifice something that had made them successful in China in the first place. Fight back and cut prices aggressively, risk destroying their premium brand positioning. Maintain premium positioning, risk becoming irrelevant as the market shifted around them. Try to do both, risk confusing consumers and diluting their identity entirely. What they were facing wasn't poor management or strategic mistakes, like what are you supposed to do when disruption creates genuinely unwinnable scenarios? Starbucks' first instinct was to out-tech the tech company. In August 2018, just 10 months later after Luckin's launch, Starbucks announced a transformational partnership with Alibaba. But there was a fundamental problem. Starbucks was trying to retrofit the tech-first experience onto their third-place business model. The results were predictably clunky. While Luckin's customers could order coffee in 30 seconds through a purpose-built app, Starbucks customers had to navigate multiple platforms, different payment systems, and a delivery experience that didn't work smoothly. But the deeper issue was this. Starbucks had spent 18 years teaching Chinese consumers that coffee was about experience and ambience. Now they were suddenly saying, actually, convenience and speed matters most. The message was confusing. By 2019, the pressure to compete on price was already building. Luckin was selling latte for around 15 to 18 RMB, roughly $2.50, and using heavy app promotions to pull prices even lower. But the true 9.9 RMB war didn't erupt until 2023, after one of Luckin's ousted co-founders launched Cuddy Coffee in late 2022. Cuddy copied Luckin's old playbook, slashing prices to 9.9 RMB, about $1.40, and even lower through online coupons. Luckin was forced to defend its turf in 2023 by rolling out its own massive 9.9 RMB weekly promotions, igniting a full-blown price war across China's coffee market. Picture the dilemma Starbucks was caught in. First came Luckin, flooding the market with endless discounts. Then rivals like Cuddy Coffee and Manor Coffee piled on, dragging the entire coffee industry into a race to the bottom. At first, Starbucks resisted and emphasized that they would not engage in the ongoing price wars, but will instead focus on fostering community connections through quality coffee. But the market didn't care about Starbucks' principles. As one Chinese consumer put it, the price war has shown us that coffee is a daily necessity that should be affordable. However, the high prices at Starbucks no longer matches the quality they offer. But ultimately, Starbucks began to give ground, quietly at first. From 2019 to 2020, they started testing promotions through Chinese e-commerce platforms. By 2022, they struck a partnership with Meituan, one of China's biggest delivery apps, offering coupons and delivery discounts. And in June 2025, Starbucks went further, announcing its first significant menu-wide price cuts in 25 years. But every price cut chipped away at Starbucks' premium image. On Chinese social media platform Weibo, The hashtag Starbucks triggered by 9.9 RMB coffee went viral, with users mocking how desperate the company looked. The erosion of brand equity was inevitable. Once you enter a price war, consumers stop valuing you for lifestyle or experience, and they start judging you purely on price. And if the price becomes the main consideration, why would anyone choose Starbucks over the cheaper alternatives? Now, some analysts argued that Starbucks should have doubled down on its premium positioning, becoming even more exclusive and experiential. The Shanghai Reserve Roastery, a 30,000 square foot coffee theater, embodied this approach, showcasing Starbucks at its most luxurious. But this strategy had problems of its own. Here is the brutal math. A Reserve Roastery brings in far more spending per customer. Visitors often spend up to 4 times more than at a standard Starbucks. But these massive 15,000 to 30,000 square foot spaces can only serve a fraction of the customer that several smaller stores could handle. In other words, the premium strategy would almost certainly mean lower overall revenue, at least in the short to medium term. That creates a management dilemma. Wall Street expects quarterly growth, and Starbucks executives are evaluated on revenue and profit, telling shareholders, look, we're going to close profitable stores to build fewer, more expensive ones that might take years to pay off, is a hard sell, especially when competitors like Luckin are opening thousands of outlets at lightning speed. By the way, this is the same paradox faced by the global luxury retail industry. As consulting firm McKinsey noted in its 2025 report, the sector's rapid expansion over the past 5 years had led to overexposure and has weakened the industry's promise of exclusivity. In other words, when luxury brands scale too quickly, they lose the very scarcity that justifies premium pricing in the first place. For Starbucks management, watching Luckin flood the market with new stores while they debated whether to protect exclusivity must have felt like economic suicide. The premium strategy might have preserved the brand equity in the long run, but in the short run, it almost guaranteed a loss of market share and revenue, just as competition was heating up. But there's another fundamental issue with Starbucks. You see, premium positioning only works if consumers believe the premium is justified. Once Luckin showed Chinese customers they could get what many described as better tasting coffee for half the price, Starbucks suddenly had to prove its coffee was dramatically better, not just marginally better. The problem is that coffee, unlike luxury goods, has limited room for differentiation. A latte, at the end of the day, is still a latte. Sure, Starbucks could have gone ultra gourmet with like rare beans and exotic brewing methods, but that was never its brand. And let's be honest, serious coffee aficionados were already choosing independent Italian or Australian style cafes over Starbucks anyway. And Starbucks' last big edge, the third place experience between home and office, only justified a premium for so long. By the late 2010s, even that advantage was eroding. China, like the rest of the world, was being flooded with co-working spaces like WeWork, and despite WeWork's spectacular implosion, the model itself gave Chinese people new places for meetings and hangouts. Starbucks was no longer the only game in town for community or business space, which made its steep price premium even harder to defend. Some Western media have suggested that Starbucks' decline in China is partly due to rising nationalism pushed by the Chinese government under the banner of Guochao, the idea that consumers should favor local products over foreign brands. But our research show that explanation doesn't really hold up. If Guochao was the main driver, then every other foreign brand in China should be struggling as well, right? But brands like Apple and McDonald's seem to be doing just fine in China. Ultimately, everyday people don't switch their coffee preferences just based on what the government tells them, even if you might think that's how things work in China.
那你刚刚提到的这些品牌好像都是国内的一些品牌啊，中国的一些咖啡品牌。那你觉得就是很多越来越多的中国人他不去喝星巴克和这个所谓的这个爱国主义啊这方面有关系吗？
我觉得这一方面关系有可能因人而异，有可能会有，但不会很大。还有我想到的就是说，除了咖啡的品牌，因为国内更多的有那种 包括奶茶的饮品也越来越多了，所以就是说大家的选择的面就很广。
我觉得这个应该是完全错误的吧。我觉得我们并没有说是排外啊这种想法的。这种东西还是服务于我们自己吧。觉得我们自己觉得好喝，就会侧重于哪个品牌。
The truth is, the China market has simply evolved. Like any other consumer market, new competitors showed up and reshaped how people think about coffee. And now, there really isn't much Starbucks can do to reverse that perception. But that raises a bigger question. If you're like me, you might be thinking, wait, I want to start a business. And I thought the way to avoid being commoditized by competition was to build a strong premium brand people would buy from no matter what. If Starbucks couldn't figure it out, what chance do I have? Take Apple. Apple still commands premium prices because its perceived design and functional superiority makes the premium feel justified in core use cases. Coffee, though, is different because it's been commoditized at the functional level. A latte is a latte. For Starbucks, the only remaining differentiation was experiential, the vibe, the store, the third place. But experiential perks can't really sustain a 100% plus price premium for something people consume every day. So by 2023, Starbucks had lost the daily coffee market to local competitors and was left competing primarily for occasional experiences and brand loyalty. Their China revenue peaked and began declining. Same-store sales turned negative. Market share collapsed from 42% to 14%. The company that had once defined coffee culture in China was now scrambling to remain relevant. The tragic irony is that every strategy that might have saved Starbucks would have destroyed what made Starbucks special in the first place. They were trapped by their own success. In business school case studies, this would become known as the Starbucks paradox, when your core strengths become structural weaknesses in the face of disruption, and every response accelerates your decline. As of 2025, the question isn't really whether Starbucks can win in China anymore. It's whether they can find a graceful way to stay relevant without completely burning their brand. But here's the twist. There are actually signs of a rebound. In the latest quarter, Starbucks' China sales went up about 8% year over year, and same-store sales even ticked up by 2%. At the same time, there are reports that Starbucks is exploring a partial sale of its China business, with bids valuing the unit at around $5 billion. The company says it's not really looking at a full exit, so for now, they're still in the game. And honestly, I think everything in business runs in cycle, so who knows? If Starbucks can hang on rather than pulling out completely, maybe the market will swing back in their favor. Because once everything becomes even more commoditized, especially in an AI-driven world, people may start craving that real offline human connection again. And that's the one thing Starbucks has always done better than anyone else. The only question is, can they play the long game and survive long enough to be there when that shift happens? I guess only time will tell. If you found this video insightful and want to see more deep dives like this, be sure to subscribe to Asian Boss. Our mission has always been to bring you the most authentic insights from Asia in order to breach cultural gaps and foster understanding between Asia and the West. To that end, I'm excited to show you how we are evolving beyond the street interview format to cut through the noise and provide the context and nuance that's often missing in today's fragmented media landscape. So thanks for being part of our journey. Thanks for watching this video. And as always, stay curious.